We recently heard the news that GTA 6 was going to be delayed until May of 2026. This got me thinking about how incredible the GTA journey has actually been over the last 28 years, ending up at a point where there is simply no video game that comes even close to the popularity and longevity of the GTA series. That doesn't mean, however, that it has always been this easy for them. Today I'm going to take you on a trip down GTA memory lane, looking at how the GTA series shaped itself in the face of various competitors, especially in the early years of the franchise. So if you're sitting comfortably, my name is jawibae, and this is the story of GTA's failed competitors. Grand Theft Auto first launched in 1997, and straight from the off, the general concept that the series would follow all the way through to the modern day was already being implemented. You played as a criminal in an open world environment, and you could increase your money by either completing set storyline tasks or by just causing general mayhem in the city. Or should I say cities, as the game covered 3 separate locations which would ultimately become iconic as the GTA series progressed. These 3 settings were Liberty City, San Andreas and Vice City, based on New York, San Francisco and Miami respectively. The main difference compared to the modern day GTA games is that the game was viewed from a top-down perspective. However, at the time there was a very limited number of video games that were operating in a 3D environment. You had games like Tomb Raider and Super Mario 64 which came out at a similar time. However, these 3D worlds were built up of individual levels, as opposed to an entire open world city. In terms of the competition offered by these 3D competitors, it's hard to believe that they had much of an effect on GTA at this time, as they are 3 completely different games, with only Tomb Raider really competing with GTA for PlayStation shelf space. That being said, Tomb Raider did have a much more successful launch to their series, with the debut game receiving an average game ranking score of about 90%, compared to GTA 1's average being only in the high 60s. So what about actual driving games? Well, there was always Destruction Derby 2, which came out in 1996, a Reflections creation which was indeed a 3D third-person game centered around driving mechanics. This also beat GTA when it came to ratings, sitting around the 80% mark. Some early criticisms of GTA 1 tended to focus more on the limitations, such as the lack of a minimap and the fact that you are driving pretty blind given that it's impossible to see what's coming up ahead of you. And so you could say it's hard to gauge where GTA 1 stood in terms of its competition at this time. It didn't quite manage to reach even half of the total sales that other debut entries like Tomb Raider, Crash Bandicoot and Gran Turismo were able to achieve at a similar time, although you could argue 3.5 million sales is still an impressive number for a debut game in a new, unique series just like GTA. And so GTA 2 development was kickstarted not long after, with the vision of building on what GTA 1 had to offer, but with more features and refinement. In GTA 1, a lot of the missions were presented to the player very much in a traditional linear fashion. However, with GTA 2, they implemented more of the kind of typical gang system we're now familiar with, getting missions over phone calls from different factions and NPCs, which offers an almost infinite set of potential directions for the player to take to reach the end of the game. There was some criticism, however, some of it centered around the unintuitive controls, and some actually based on the non-linear mission system that I just mentioned, claiming it actually made the game a little bit too sporadic and the storyline a little bit harder to follow. Perhaps they hadn't quite honed their craft at this point, or maybe there was something else that was putting them under a little bit of pressure. GTA 2 was released in October of 1999. However, in June of the same year, a new game had been released which would now sit in direct competition with the GTA series. The game in question was, of course, Driver. Reflections had experienced decent success with their Destruction Derby games I mentioned earlier, however, Driver was surely one of their more defining moments. They took the 3D driving formula they had already been using for these games and applied it to an open-world, mission-based driving game centered around an undercover cop. The campaign even takes you through 4 real-world cities. This was where they really had the edge over Rockstar at this time, as the 3D aspect and incredibly fun driving mechanics gave the game that extra edge of realism that players wanted. Perhaps the biggest difference between these 2 games would be which side of society the protagonist finds himself in, with GTA being more about the criminal activity and working your way up the underground ladder, compared to Driver's undercover cop concept. That being said, as long as you're driving fast cars, shooting people and looking at the occasional scantily clad lady, then who really cares if you're the good guy or the bad guy? This was the first time GTA had ever had direct competition, and it really put them on the back foot. GTA 2's critics would rate the game similarly to GTA 1, and given that they were largely similar games other than concept and a few minor changes, this isn't a surprise, and thus the average review would still be around the high 60s. There was however a barrage of negative criticism towards the Game Boy Color release of the game, but this could be attributed to the hardware limitations of the Game Boy itself, as it just couldn't manage the same level of fluidity that PlayStation and PC could. So what about Driver? Well, it was a real commercial success. The review figures put the game in the high 80s and low 90s, and even their Game Boy Color release was a success, something which GTA 2 hadn't managed. This reflected massively in the sales of the game. Driver sold around 6.2 million copies, largely on PlayStation. GTA 2 on the other hand sold only 2 million copies across all platforms, which was not only far less than Driver, but was also down on GTA 1 sales. There was only really one main thing that GTA 2 actually had as an advantage over Driver, and this was the ability to get out of the car and explore the world on foot and steal new cars. So, although it wasn't a horrendous disaster, it still didn't blow the market away. Coupled with the fact that they now had actual one-on-one competition in the form of Driver, it was clear that something needed to change if they wanted to dominate the market. Development immediately began on GTA 3, and it's safe to say Rockstar quickly realised it had to move into a 3D open world if it wanted to achieve the levels of success that Driver had. And they didn't have a lot of time to do this, as Reflections were already well into the development of Driver 2 by this point. Pair that with the fact that Reflections already had a good 3D open world formula to work off of, it's no surprise that Reflections would win this race, releasing Driver 2 in November of 2000. Although the reviews had dipped ever so slightly compared to its first installment, Driver 2 still did extremely well, with around 80% positive reviews and a comfortable 4.7 million sales worldwide. It had also made improvements such as a separation of the campaign and free mode, also known as Take a Ride, meaning you could complete your campaign as normal or enter into Take a Ride mode in one of the available 4 cities and cause free roam chaos. Driver 2 also included the one feature that I mentioned GTA had to its advantage, the ability to get out of your car and steal new ones, or cause havoc as an armed civilian. This undoubtedly put a lovely bit of pressure on Rockstar, as both series now had 2 games, with Driver holding a clear edge over GTA at this stage of the story, with overwhelmingly better reviews and a few million more sales in total. This mattered a lot, as the games had an extremely similar player base, as well as being largely available on all of the same platforms. So, would Rockstar be able to rise to the occasion and produce a video game worthy of taking down this tough opponent, something so revolutionary that it would establish the GTA series in PlayStation and gaming history? The answer to that question is yes. Before I get into the turning point that was GTA 3, I just wanted to quickly ask you to subscribe, or if you don't want to do that, then at least like the video and help give me a little boost. I'm a super small channel and I absolutely love making these videos, and I like to believe that my videos are pretty high quality and informative, so any help that you can give me to push them out to a bit of a wider audience would in fact make you an epic legend. GTA 3 would release in October of 2001, and guess what? For the first time in history, we had a 3D open world Grand Theft Auto game. GTA 3 was only based in one location, Liberty City, also known as New York, and was actually delayed by a month following the attacks of 9/11, as some themes and missions were changed to avoid any correlation or similarities to that of the recent events, such as the police cars being reskinned to avoid resemblance to the NYPD. That being said, when it did come out, it absolutely thundered its way through old and new fans alike. It barely faltered in any area, the soundtrack was phenomenal, graphically it was impressively put together, and the mission structure was far more refined, with sets of linear storylines that you could complete in any order depending on which NPCs you interacted with. While I do like Driver 2's concept of having the campaign separated from its Take a Ride free mode, I think the fact that GTA had its campaign and free mode combined gave it an extra feel of realism, as you could explore as you like and pick up missions when you felt like it, and your enjoyment of free mode itself would change as you go through the missions and increase things like your stats and your money. You could consider that Driver 2's whopping 4 cities to explore was an advantage over GTA 3's sole location. However, I actually think it's quite the opposite, as Driver was very much just 4 playgrounds for driving, with very little to actually do or interact with. Liberty City, on the other hand, was absolutely awash with interactability and realism. Plenty of pedestrians, gang systems, interior locations to explore, stunt jumps, a day-night cycle, and even things like a music radio system that felt realistic. This would turn out to be one of the most important games for the GTA series, as it really put them ahead of Driver and was an integral part of the solidifying of Rockstar as one of the big players in the gaming industry. GTA 3 sold an absolutely whopping 14.5 million copies and had reviews of around 97%, ultimately becoming one of the best-selling games in PlayStation 2 history, selling 11 million copies on PS2 alone. It was also the second highest rated PS2 game of all time, second only to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. And with that, the ball was fully in Rockstar's court at this stage. If Driver 3 wanted to beat them off the top spot, it would have to be absolutely unbelievable. Now, development was already underway when GTA 3 came out, and Reflections were pulling out some pretty big Hollywood stars to voice some of the main characters, which certainly implied that they were going to go big or go home with Driver's third installment. You had Michael Madsen, Iggy Pop, and Michelle Rodriguez to name a few. However, just 1 year after GTA 3's release, before we could even get a look in on Driver 3, Rockstar would hit us with yet another commercial success, GTA Vice City. Due to the success of GTA 3, the formula was largely unchanged for Vice City, other than obvious changes such as location, storyline, and things such as a larger selection of radio stations and slightly more refined vehicle and weapon mechanics. Now, even though GTA 3 had broken sales records, GTA Vice City would somehow find headroom, selling over 17.5 million copies, 14 million of which were on PS2 alone. Reflections and publisher Atari must have been feeling a little bit nervous now, considering their competitors had, in the last 2 years alone, sold almost 4 times as much as the entire Driver series combined. Not to mention, Vice City had also been rated in the high 90s. Now, 2002 would come and go, as would 2003, and there was still no sign of a new Driver game. Meanwhile, Rockstar were now developing the 5th entry to the GTA series. However, there was good news for Driver fans, as PSM2 and Xbox World Magazine had both been offered early exclusive copies of Driver 3, and had both reported extremely high reviews for the game, building the hype and giving fans hope that despite the long development time, Reflections were going to hit back at Rockstar with a record breaker of a game. June 2004 would arrive, and it was now Driver's turn to answer. When Driver 3 was released, it was immediately met with heavy criticisms. It felt unfinished, full of bugs, and although graphically it was an improvement from Driver 2, it was very hard to see improvements in other areas compared to its predecessor. The campaign mode was still separate from the Take a Ride mode, and again, Take a Ride featured very few interactable locations or things to do, other than driving around and getting chased by the police, which weren't particularly difficult to escape. Reviews would sit around a disappointing 50%, and sales had halted around the 3 million mark, 14 million down on GTA Vice City. There were immediate suspicions of foul play from the PSM2 and Xbox World magazines, as it was believed that they had been paid off to provide fake reviews for the game pre-release in order to build the hype. And although it was never admitted, it was all but confirmed when forum discussions would receive positive comments defending the magazines from accounts which would later be found out to be fake profiles made by a PR company hired by Driver's publisher Atari to try and cover up the conspiracy. It's safe to say that Driver had lost its place as GTA's main competitor, and essentially lost its place as a video game series altogether, as Reflections' lead developer Martin Edmondson was forced to resign and Atari sold the series onto Ubisoft. It also came out later on that Atari had actually rushed Reflections at the end of the development period, and had requested that they launch the game in whatever state it was in, hence the unfinished feel to the game. I actually have a full video already which dives deep into the failure and scandalous nature of Driver 3, and I highly recommend watching that later on, as it's an extremely interesting story, and I go into far more detail than I will in this video, as I'm focusing more on GTA's storyline today. Speaking of GTA, San Andreas would release 4 months after Driver 3, and it's hardly a surprise that it was once again rated in the high 90s, as well as selling a monstrous 21 million sales. That is 7 times that of Driver 3. Rockstar would now take the longest break between games that we had seen so far in the story. As, let's be honest, with Driver's failure and San Andreas' success, they didn't need to push another game out so quickly. In fact, they were still drowning in success from the last 3 games. San Andreas would sit comfortably as the newest installment for around 4 years, during which time Ubisoft would bring Driver back in 2006 in the form of Driver Parallel Lines, which performed, there's no other way of saying it, absolutely dreadfully. Although the ratings were up on Driver 3, which wasn't exactly difficult, it sold only around 300,000 copies, which only further proved that there was just simply no coming back from Driver 3. There was, however, another game released in 2006, which was gearing up for the task of taking on this mighty franchise. When Saints Row first released, it was met with very decent reviews, and although some players immediately dismissed it as a GTA wannabe, others were impressed by the much more modern graphics, the slightly more chaotic feel of the game, as well as the fact that it was simply quite fun. There were also a host of features that Saints Row had that San Andreas didn't, such as the ability to customize your own character, the more modern graphics and feel as I just mentioned, and the more fun chaotic aspect of the game compared to GTA's more darker, serious themes. Despite the fact that it was almost impossible to touch GTA in terms of sales, the first Saints Row installment sold over 2 million copies, a very respectable number for a debut entry. They actually had another small advantage, as the game launched onto the new generation of consoles, mainly the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, and so although Saints Row was not as massive or polished as the GTA series, it had made a good start, and 2 years later in 2008 we would see Saints Row 2 be released. It built on the first game and made improvements such as more customization, new vehicles, and a more polished feel, as well as an improved respect system. It was once again met with some great acclaim, having over 80% positive reviews. Unfortunately for them, just 4 months prior, Rockstar had released the long anticipated GTA 4. Now, to date, Saints Row 2 has made just over 3 million sales. GTA 4, however, well, it sold 3.6 million copies on day one of release. This was another revolutionary moment in the GTA series. The game had made a huge jump graphically, with a super realistic feel and a very busy, real-world atmosphere across the whole city. The missions were extremely fun, and the storyline was extremely refined and, most importantly, interesting. There was all sorts of stuff to do in the city to keep you busy, whether it was vigilante missions or taxi runs, or just one of the many character storylines to advance as you play through the game. It's hardly a surprise that it sold over 25 million copies and received critical scores of up to 98%, making it one of the highest rated games of all time. At this point, it's safe to say that no competition, no matter how promising, would be able to get even close to what Rockstar were achieving with GTA. Not only had they created a great legacy for themselves, but the budget they were now playing with was phenomenal compared to the other newer series. Also, a side effect of this legacy they had created was that they were in no rush to produce another game, and could spend a lot more time focusing on nailing whatever they would come up with next, instead of racing against competition like they had to back when Reflections were knocking at the door with Driver. In the years following GTA 4, there were a few video games that performed decently and had similar open world feels, and were very much aimed at the same target audience. For example, Mafia 2 was released in 2010, and although it wasn't commonly considered to be a GTA clone, it was an open world game centered around crime and missions, albeit thematically different. It sold 5 million copies and had good reviews, but was hardly making an impact on GTA. In 2011, Saints Row would release their third installment, and once again they had made an improvement, although not greatly significant over its predecessor. The reviews were really good, and the sales were in the high 5 millions. Talk about them being a GTA clone had died down a little bit, especially considering Saints Row the Third started to really lean into the crazy chaotic mayhem side of things and appeared to be taking its own direction a little bit. In 2012, Square Enix would drop Sleeping Dogs, an open world game set in Hong Kong, based around the storyline of an undercover cop trying to break his way into a criminal organisation. Although thematically different, there were comparisons drawn to GTA's open world and free mode exploration. It sold a few million copies and had generally very good reviews. However, it was clear that there was no game that was ever going to match the popularity of GTA 4. Simply put, nobody could do it just quite like Rockstar did. This would be confirmed once again in 2013 with not only GTA 5 but the brand new revolutionary GTA Online. Outstanding graphics, an unbelievably captivating and fun story mode, mountains of things to do in single player free mode, and even more things to do in the online mode such as races, co-op missions, gang wars, the list goes on and on and on. It felt like every game from GTA 3 onwards was a real step forward for the series, but none quite reached the level that GTA 5 did. To date, it sold an estimated 200 million copies, and even broke the Guinness World Record for highest selling video game in the first 24 hours, selling over 11 million copies on the first day alone. It's safe to say, GTA is going absolutely nowhere. It'll be a long time before we see a game shatter the gaming industry quite like GTA 5 and Online did. This does set a certain level of expectation for GTA 6, but if there's one thing we can take away from this video so far, is that GTA has never failed to be incredible. That, ultimately, is why no game has ever managed to successfully dethrone Rockstar. You could argue that Driver did have one over them at the beginning, but their lead was brief, and once Rockstar got themselves on track and Driver kind of self-sabotaged, the only way was up for Rockstar. You would say that their closest competitors at the time of GTA 5's release was Saints Row. However, they would lose a lot of their fanbase after the fourth installment, which was released around the same time. A lot of players simply just didn't enjoy how silly the games had become, and paired with the success of GTA 5, it was poor timing. And much like Driver, the Saints Row series never quite got back to the decent level it was once at. It's been really fascinating looking at the competition that GTA have faced over the years and how it shaped their journey to success. The reason they've waited what's probably going to be 13 years between GTA 5 and 6 is just simply down to the longevity of GTA 5's online mode. With constant updates, and most of them good, some not so much, it's managed to keep a hold of its player base after all of this time. I don't think I know a single person who is into video games on any level who hasn't played GTA 5 at some point. It's going to be fascinating to see where they can take it with GTA 6, given that we're now 2 generations of console ahead of where we were 13 years ago. A few months ago, I made a video talking about things I hope they change from GTA 5 heading into GTA 6, so feel free to fall asleep to that video at some point, but if you've enjoyed this little trip down Rockstar memory lane, then it would mean a lot to me if you could like the video, and you might as well subscribe too to see more like this. But anyway, my name is jawibae, thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time.